What are we hearing from the nation? When will we wake up to the fact of our imprisonment? Why are we not hearing all the memories? We memorialize all the people that have come before us and died in the name of some entity and honoring all their deaths. Are we looking at a nation that has allowed itself to be put into an obvious state of war, the people of which are the enemy combatants that nobody is saying anything about? When are we going to make that important? And why aren't we all standing up to stop the nonsense? I haven't quite figured it out yet. I'm still looking for the response. Clive Bundy got a whole ton of response. Why didn't your imprisonment? Why don't we have the psyche, the psychology, the mentality, the intelligence to figure out that we are in a ton of trouble? Why do we keep hiding behind what we think we know and how awake we are instead of actually stepping out and finding out how little we actually know? How controlled we actually are? I'm really not sure that people appreciate the state of war that we are in as declared by the various things we're shown. Remember, the Liber Code. I took 6 broadcast segments in order to read that to you. I felt it was so important when I was on the other network. I wasn't just speaking to myself. You're explained right in that document, which is international law since 1907, that you will not be told you're under martial law. You don't have to be anyway. And you will not understand that you're underneath a military rule because that could be the rule, that you won't be told. That I haven't figured out why people aren't paying attention to this. That when Congress made an act that declared everybody an enemy combatant, that the Supreme Court would not stand in the gap to declare the law for everybody, to understand what that liability is, to have challenged whether or not that was a color of law, a false assertion of authority, a war against a non-state. Are you kidding me? And everything fails, and then Congress comes back and reauthorizes the money to pay for you to be pulled off the face of the planet and put who knows where. That I decided that I needed to back off telling you the news because it just seems to be the entertainment that we tend to sit back and be lulled by. Like, because we know all this stuff, it actually gives us somewhere to be. I'm not quite sure what more I can think about saying. I'm not quite sure what I can be focused on. And at some level, I told you, how much more can you talk about this? Okay, we mentioned NDAA. Oh, you can be whisked off. The likelihood's not very good, but no one understands that the war, the civil war I told you was coming when I saw the unqualified one getting ready to become president. Became and is the condition that we see today. And I'm understanding I might have a problem with the audio. Give me a moment here to see something here and see if I've got if I haven't lost something else. It shows that I'm going out, but I can't tell. Hang on a second, please. So, excuse me, I've got to check on something to find out why I don't have... the one line that's not going out is the Spreaker line, and the others appear to be going out, and I have bandwidth, so I'm not sure what the problem is at this point. And with the encoder running that does the archive, if that's working, if I stop now, I get an interruption in the broadcast. So let me continue and see if we can work this out as I go, which is very difficult, as you know. At any rate, it's the way we do stuff everywhere on this digital whirlwind that we tend to find ourselves. So at any rate, I am just really, I don't have a whole lot that when I think about doing the broadcast, as I said before, I don't have more to tell you at some level. We're in some real trouble here. What you don't understand is the reflection that ripples out, whether or not you become picked up, black, bagged, and tagged. Is kind of irrelevant, because what happens is it sets up an idea in the government. As you see now, I don't know if you've got the news. The notice to you is that more Americans have been killed by the police in America than were killed in Iraq. For all you Memorial Day rememberers. I don't understand how this is passing our sight. What were we remembering on Memorial Day? That people died? That good people died? To support what? That we're not standing up now to honor that. Are we that absent a society? Are we that gone that we don't recognize, that we don't understand that? I really have a little bit of trouble with this. I've asked you to send me emails, markonthebeach@yahoo.com. Do you have another thought? Not many responses. Is there another way that I can be looking at this? Now, that's on top of everything we have to do every day, is what I'm looking at. They're doing this very, very well. Not only do they have you locked down and they give you nothing because you started dealing with their fiat currency, they then start coming in with these regulations from all over the place, and no one asks them where their damn jurisdiction is. Where's your authority? Question the authority. You come behind the woodshed to have an authority tell you what the authority is. And then you're supposed to be set out in the world with those principles in you. And we never turned around and said, wait a minute, all you people out in the world trying to come down on me, you don't have that authority. And we don't say hold the bus. We don't lock the brakes up as soon as they become the people became the enemy. To a fiction on top of it, over a fabricated issue on top of that. A stateless war in the world. Are you kidding me? And then your so-called representatives go ahead and vote money to pay for a system, a machine, to make you the target at some point. And drones are going to be okay. People are kind of missing the fact that, but we're not going to use the munitions on them. Well, that's not yet. This doesn't happen overnight. The failure of your remedy in law hasn't explained to you that you're living under military rule. That is a really big deficiency. And so I've decided to read some things to try and give us an idea of who the real authority is. And if you can understand this, that it imposes when you find out the real authority, it imposes upon that authority the responsibility to act. Where you have the right, the ability to act, you have the duty and responsibility to act. And I see comments periodically, though I really don't pay attention to the chat room. It really distracts me. And I wish I could do that for you all, but I can't. I just can't. I can't hold it together and keep all these other thoughts and get to the point I'm trying to think about that seems important to me at the time we're talking. that I see comments being made, oh, I did this, I went down to the county, I did that, I made a phone call, and that's it. Once? Folks, this is an ongoing battle. You can't just do it once. I used to go down to the county every business meeting and every the financial meetings I did periodically, but every week I'd go down and do the business meeting. I did this for 6 months. We were pushing monstrous questions upon the county commissioners and how they were violating the law, how they were taxing property owners unlawfully, let alone illegally too. How they had, and this is all of years, it's still happening, folks. How you can go, and I hear the patriot side, patriot people. I came through that. I was able to see through a lot of the nonsense and the noise that's been thrown in our way. And I avoided that somehow like the plague. I could sense the problem. And I could see the truth, and I could see how it was misinterpreted and misused to get us down the wrong path. And there's this thing that we call HJR 192. I've never seen a patriot so-called when trying to defend themselves or explain something, actually understand that it's not some law back in 1933, I think it was. It's actually United States statute you can rely on right now. That I took that. I say we, I was at the time with a group of people that just showed up every week and went on the streets and had our signs. And we made our messages, and we got our responses, and we did what we could. It was every week, folks, and then every Friday or whatever day we had our signs. We had real simple signs, nothing all real well made. You can see them from 3 blocks away. You could read the nice, maybe 4 or 5 words on each sign said something. We'd go into the county, and I had these people. We were all supportive of each other. We weren't a group. I told you can't be a group. You have to be on your own, working on your own. It happened in alliance with people, all working on their point. And I would come in with these questions. How are you taxing people when taxing people for a Federal Reserve note is a violation of federal law? Not just HJR 192, which was the truth for the fact of the existence, but it wasn't being applied right by the so-called patriots. That all you have to do is show that the demand of a particular type of coin and currency is a violation of federal law. It's the invocation of HJR 192, which shows you that they can't lawfully tax your property, even if it is real property and not fee simple or patent, evidenced by patent. That we have come through the so-called independent media, we've come through the so-called patriot mindset, the tax group, so-called tax protesters. We're not protesting the tax. We're protesting the fact that you wrongly apply the code. That I've been through all of this for going on 30 years now, watching all this nonsense, and with all this knowledge and all the authorities sitting in the so-called law, the statutes you think work as law. We've come to a day in all this activity and all this it's apparently wasted effort. We came to this point where we thought we had knowledge, and then we forgot we had to apply it somehow. That we can't even apply the most basic and simplest things already in the code, that we have to make a big deal about all that we know. And it goes nowhere. Why I came on this broadcast and it says, your knowledge is not power. And anybody who hears this, if you've never heard it before, is in any kind of a properly thinking mind, has to agree with this. And I haven't found anybody to show me different. And this is a long time running now. That knowledge is not power. It's the knowledge applied that becomes power. Now, whether that's a power that can overcome another potential power is a whole nother dynamic. But if you're not applying what you know properly, well, what do you think? If you're not applying something properly, if you're using a screwdriver where you need to use a pair of pliers, if you're using a pair of pliers where you need to use a wrench, where you're using a grinder where you should have a cutting torch, what do you think the outcome's going to be? And this is what I've watched for all this time. And this is what I've seen coming down the pike. And all of a sudden, everyone knows so much. And we're still at a point that nobody, it seems nobody, I say that in the general, nobody understands. You don't have a remedy in law for the oppression you're living that doesn't have to tell you that it's a military occupation in order to continue to make it that they are in control and you live in only a freedom but are not free. We can be told of all the ways your birth certificate makes you something subject. You know what? If you listen to it, it just creates a legal entity that's not you. And yet we wrap all this time like it's going to defend us, like it's a shield. It's going to defend us from the system of oppression that's been laid out for us that we didn't know was there. We were born into it. For those of you who think The Matrix was a movie, The Matrix was not a movie. Go listen to at least the first one. Do you understand the prison you live in? I've been telling you. I didn't learn it from there. That was just the confirmation that what looked to be an insanity was the truth. That we keep talking today and we keep thinking we know so much and we keep saying how much we know and we say because we know so much and everybody's asleep, I'm just going to go and do nothing. I've said who I could I've told who I could tell, they're not worth it. The problem is whatever we've done has now come to the point when now we are like crickets as a nation against a war being declared against us, and we have not a peep coming from the people. Why I was reading and will read. In fact, I've decided, I forgot that I've done the Libre Code. I took 6 programs. Somehow you lose these things over time. I'm going to go and I'm going to return to finish this very important information that gives you an idea that you have a separate thought than even what you've been given by the system of inculcation they call the education system and the system of public notice called the news. That you and I have to come to a more independent thought with an independent mind. Rethinking, as I tell you, repent is nothing but rethinking. Step back. Don't buy, don't comply, ask why. Folks, did you miss it again? Step back and re-look at this prison you live in that you didn't know you live in. It's like, does a fish question the water it sits in? This is the prison they've set up around us. And now they've fulfilled it so much that they've moved quickly to execute upon execution of anybody that has a thought against it. Give it an excuse, another colorable imposition. In other words, a theft by extortion felony, if it wasn't treason alone, to come against you in every facet of your life. You've watched them explain these are ubiquitous they, explaining how they were going to do it. And what I see people, they take and they believe that because they see that, the sheer knowledge of that protects them. And I was commenting to a friend of mine last night, just quickly on a chat. That's not what's going to happen. This is not a shield. You have to learn what the object of the desire of they is and learn how to subvert that and avoid as much as possible what you're facing. Which is one of my gripes with minors generally, is they're not listening to what I'm saying about avoiding as much as generally. And those that do listen, it's amazing. It's like night and day. In fact, I won't go into it too much, but we have an evidence. One minor across the street from the other. One got his property taken completely, could not work his claim, and the other guy who did it right, he's working. To show you how subtle this answer is and how sufficient it is when you are perfectly sitting in a place where you expose those criminals that haven't quite yet had the power at the local level or the agency level outside of the cabinet of the White House to declare you an enemy combatant. We're that close, folks, that I keep suggesting to you as nicely, I guess, without all the harangue and without all the pomp and circumstance and without all the shingles that make you think, like I see lots of people, they tell you how much how they were an attorney and all this other stuff, how much law they understand, and it's nothing, folks. That I tell you to look for yourself. Look for yourself. And don't use those rose-colored glasses unless you've seen that movie, what, They Live? Maybe those glasses is what you need. Maybe you need to see the world in a new light. As I went through and heard about Memorial Day, and just remember, there's a fact. People died, folks, for this country, so-called. Whatever this thing is now. And nobody recognizes or wants to say anything that America died weeks before that. That day a few days ago called Memorial Day. Which people in the hundreds of thousands have died. The evidence of which we now have in this country, there's more people dying at the hands of the execution by cops than there have been soldiers murdered. What about those people, the memorial for those people, folks? I'm somewhat stunned still. I really don't know what to expose. And we sit there and we sit kind of smug in our knowledge, like that is anything. That I can just tell you, when someone sets their sights on, and the really scary part about this was that it dawned on me, we're talking about somewhat, if you could, legitimize the fact of someone coming and taking you out, black bagging you and hauling you off without indefinitely detaining you, without the remedies, without courts, without anything, certainly you're not prepared to, even in the most basic ways, to even try to assert it from the inside, notwithstanding the lack of normal process, that they would be able to do this by having just an excuse locally should terrify you. That someone who doesn't like you in a position of authority can say that one is a problem and make a hocus-pocus answer around it, just like they deny everything else. They make it up just as much. They make up their own power right before you, and there's no remedy for it. As you'll also find out when those of you who think you know walk in and try to apply all that you know. That they make this stuff up, and they can make up that you're the enemy that they want out of here, and they use this NDAA to do so. Or at least ostensibly. See, it all works on a color of authority. It all works on the continuing felony, and no one can stop it. That should terrify you. The cover is off of it. But it's been off for me for a long time. So this is just, I'm just talking to myself, already knowing what I've seen. Getting back to dealing with the county, went for 6 months. We put very substantial questions about how are you not committing a crime, demanding a particular kind of coin of currency from a property owner under the cover of taxes. How are you able to do that? It's a violation of federal law. And what we got out it took them 6 months to get to this question. We had a special meeting. It wasn't closed, but it was in the back room. They had the county's attorney right there. And the county's attorney told me, well, you bring up a very important and interesting question, which I don't have the answer for. We're going to have to seek out a law professor. Is your mind reeling right now, folks? That the county's legal counsel has to go seek out an answer from a law professor for something that is duty-bound in the officers themselves to already know? I'm sitting there shocked. What do you mean you have to go to a law professor? I turned it back over to the commissioner that finally allowed the meeting. I said, you're supposed to know the answer to that. It's not something the law professor can tell you. It's written in statute. Long story short on that, and you'll find out when you actually take your knowledge and start applying it, how inert the system is to law and justice, if you will. In other words, it's a facade for your convenience that the Lieber Code completely explains, is put there for your entertainment. They still violate federal law to collect property taxes because they demand a particular type of coin and currency, which is, in law, illegal. Fascinating. Fascinating what keeps going on. And it's still going on to this day despite our disclosure. So when you think you know a whole lot, I'm telling you, you don't, because you haven't applied it to find out you don't have the experience to know that knowledge doesn't mean anything. It takes a whole lot more of us doing a whole lot more, period. Why, if I can add this, go to the jump years later, why, when I saw the mining law and the authority of a mining district, I could see the potential to become a much more formidable force, focusing a whole lot more people more formidably against the problem, in a place that can enjoy national security. Because it also occurred to me, and I've told many of people who listen to me, that the one who's going to win this is the one, and it's going to be in the government's hands to do so if they chose to, first, the one who relies on the general public interest under police powers is going to win this argument. And guess where the NDAA sets its authority right now? The necessity of national security. So you have to have a power that matches that. These people are not stupid where they had to go. They went right where they needed to go, and I was able to see that they did that. I was trying to figure out how do we take an occupying force and control the force, because it's going to do everything it can to make sure it's legitimate. Where does it need to go? And it went there, folks, if you haven't noticed. We have a very tough time right here. However, with all my experience now, understanding that government's a facade, and the offices of government are a facade, we can now actually put those facts and understanding with presumptions that are being worked on that aren't so. We can put all these things and more together. Those of you that think you know, you can pull all your knowledge that you think you know together, and work from the presumption, and then you put yourself in a status that requires that they prove the contrary, and you place the burden on that side. You don't take it on yourself. That we've been finding a whole lot more success in that than professing how much we know and moving from the fact of what we think we know just because black law says so. And we learn not to make it up, because that system doesn't care about what you think you know. It doesn't care about what you think is what it is. It is what they're going to give you, as I've been telling you. Lincoln said, Benjamin Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it. Now, that's irrelevant. The style of the government's irrelevant when you're being guided by the puppeteers. But he said, at least you keep the style of a Republican form of government that we gave you, if you can keep it. So you have only what you were gave to start with. That's how you're treated inside that system. And so knowing all these answers and knowing all these ideas about what you think you know about what you think you know aren't going to be of any force and effect until you put it up against someone who don't care. And now you realize the war that you're in, which is what I'm trying to prepare you, have been trying to prepare you for, which we are now kind of way beyond the point. When you're being executed in the streets, when there's an open season on anybody that they want to decide is an enemy combatant in a country that the battlefield is your country, and no one stops to say, but wait a minute, you violated your duty to protect us to begin with to allow it. Then you allowed it on some fictitious idea, and it's a color of law authority because you can't prove any of it. That maybe you just failed yourself as the government that was established. That maybe you have no authority other than the barest of invaders. That nobody in this country, in the United States of America, stepped up to say anything is still astonishing to me. With all y'all know, with all y'all how powerful you think you are and what you think you know you can do, we're all just sitting there waiting for the eagle to pluck Fred and Alice and Gregory off the prairie dog hill. Which kind of bothers me a little bit from all of us that we're supposed to know so much. And I've told you by myself, I know I can't. There's just no way I can do this by myself. I told you, when you get into a battle by yourself with this oppressive power, you're going to find how little you can do. It doesn't mean you're dead. It doesn't mean you can't do nothing. Believe me, when they collect me up, and they stuck me in the hole for 3 weeks, every day, 24/7, it was a strategy battle going on. They wanted some stuff, and I wasn't going to give it to them, and I was going to make it difficult on them, even though I couldn't talk to anyone. So it's not over, but you're not effective, and that's the problem. I realized when that was the case, and they trump up and they can fabricate any kind of thing, they can whisk you away so no one knows where you're at. This was before, folks, this was before the Patriot Act, okay? So when I saw Patriot Act, I knew exactly all life was confirmed as to where we were going. When you're put away, there's nobody to help you. And then you find out there's nobody to help you outside. That you have to have something inside. And you better have to have that inside internal to you. There's a spirit that you have to have. This becomes a battle beyond us, folks. If you haven't understood this yet. That I decided I'd go back and start to show you. There was other times a war was declared on the people of America. It was called the Civil War, and there was people that were looking at that during and after and before, and they had thoughts. And they had thoughts that were not clouded by today's inculcations we call education, whether even before Common Core, but has always been. They were treating us as work units since at least the 30s. We were just productive units. They were going to use legal entities to be the intercessor between the fiction and the life. And they were going to get us to believe that we were what they were talking about, and that was going to be it. That there was people that lived in a time before us. At the same time, there was a war upon them that had observations about the reality of what was going on. That I wanted us to be understanding, and so I started to read. And I'm going to do this again. I'm going to continue the article I started last week, because I hope, as you were hearing last week, I hope questions were coming up in you that you cannot use as a knowledge. You say, oh, that's a point that can refute an imposition the government makes on me. And what I'm saying here now is I can take that question and turn it to be a fact and evidence that has not been proven, and turn the burden on the system that requires that fact to be an evidence and just presumes it to be so. That you can eliminate their authority even where they think they've got it. No body of men can be said to authorize a man to act as their agent to the injury of a third person unless they do it in so open and an authentic manner as to make themselves personally responsible for his acts. None of the voters in this country appoint their political agents in any open, authentic manner or in any manner to make themselves responsible for their acts. Therefore, these pretended agents cannot legitimately claim to be real agents. Somebody must be responsible for the acts of these pretended agents, and if they cannot show any open and authentic credentials from their principles, they cannot, in law or reason, be said to have any principles. The maxim applies here that what does not appear does not exist. If they are shown, they can show no principles, they have none. But even these pretended agents do not themselves know who their pretended principles are. These latter act in secret, for acting by secret ballot is acting in secret as much as if they were to meet in secret conclave in the darkness of the night. And they are personally as much unknown to the agents they select as they are to others. No pretended agent, therefore, can ever know by whose ballot he is selected, or consequently who is his real principals. Not knowing who his principals are, he has no right to say that he has any. He can at most say only that he is the agent of a secret band of robbers and murderers who are bound by the faith which prevails among confederates in crime to stand by him in his acts done in their name, and shall be resisted. Men honestly engaged in attempting to establish justice in the world have no occasion thus to act in secret, or to appoint agents to do acts for which the principal, are not willing to be responsible. The secret ballot makes a secret government, and a secret government is a secret band of robbers and murderers. Open despotism is better than this. The single despot stands out in the face of all men and says, I am the state. My will is law. I am your master. I take the responsibility of my acts. The only arbiter I acknowledge is the sword. If anyone denies my right, let him try conclusions with me. But the secret government is little less than a government of assassins. Under it, a man knows not who his tyrants are until they have struck, and perhaps not then. He may guess beforehand as to some of his immediate neighbors, but he really knows nothing. The man to whom he would have most naturally fly for protection may prove an enemy when the time of trial comes. This is the kind of government we have, and it is the only one we are likely to have until men are ready to say, we will consent to no constitution except such as in and one as we are neither ashamed nor afraid to sign, and we will authorize no government to do anything in our name which we are not willing to be personally responsible for. What is the motive to the secret ballot? This, and only this. Like other confederates in crime, those who use it are not friends but enemies, and they are afraid to be known and to have their individual doings known even to each other. They can contrive to bring about a sufficient understanding to enable them to act in concert against persons, but beyond this they have no confidence and no friendship among themselves. In fact, they are engaged quite as much in schemes for plundering each other as in plundering those who are not of them. And it is perfectly well understood among them that the strongest party among them will, in certain contingencies, murder each other by the hundreds of thousands, as they lately did do, to accomplish their purposes against each other. Hence, they dare not be known and have their individual doings known even to each other. And this is avowedly the only reason for the ballot, for a secret government, a government by secret bands of robbers and murderers. And we are insane enough to call this liberty. To be a member of this secret band of robbers and murderers is esteemed a privilege and an honor. Without this privilege, a man is considered a slave, but with it, a free man. With it, he is considered a free man because he has the same power to secretly, by secret ballot, procure the robbery, enslavement, and murder of another man, and that other man has to procure, as the other man has to procure his robbery, enslavement, and murder. And this they call equal rights. If any number of men, many of few, claim to the right to govern the people of this country, let them make sign an open compact with each other to do so. Let them thus make themselves individually known to those whom they propose to govern, and let them thus openly take the legitimate responsibility of their acts. How many of those who now support the Constitution will ever do this? How many will ever dare openly proclaim their right to govern, or take the legitimate responsibility of their acts? No one. It is obvious that on general principles of law and reason, there exists no such thing as a government created by or resting upon any consent, compact, or agreement of the people of the United States with each other. The only visible, tangible, responsible government that exists is that of a few individuals only who act in concert and call themselves by the several names of senators, representatives, presidents, judges, marshals, treasurers, collectors, generals, colonels, captains, etc., etc. On general principles of law and reason, it is of no importance whatever that these few individuals profess to be agents and representatives of the people of the United States. Since they can show no credentials from the people themselves, they were never appointed as agents of or representatives in any open, authentic manner. They do not themselves know and have no means of knowing and cannot prove who their principals, as they call them, are individually, and consequently cannot, in law or reason, be said to have any principles at all. It is obvious, too, that if these alleged principals ever did appoint these pretended agents or representatives, they appointed them secretly by secret ballot and in a way to avoid all personal responsibilities for their acts. That at most these alleged principals put these pretended agents forward for the most criminal purposes, viz., to plunder the people of their property and restrain them of their liberty, and that the only authority that these alleged principals have for doing so is simply a tacit understanding among themselves that they will imprison, shoot, or hang every man who resists the exactions and restraints with their agents or representatives may impose upon them. Thus, it is obvious that the only visible, tangible government we have is made up of these professed agents and representatives of a secret band of robbers and murderers who, to cover up or gloss over their robberies and murders, have taken to themselves the title of the people of the United States, and who, on the pretense of being the people of the United States, assert their right to subject to their dominion and to control and dispose of, at their pleasure, all property and persons found in the United States. On general principles of law and reason, the oaths which these agents of the people to support the Constitution are of no validity or obligation. And why? For this. If for no other reason, viz., that they are given to nobody, there is no privity, as the lawyers say, that is, no mutual recognition, consent, and agreement between those who take the oaths and any other persons. If I go upon Boston Common and in the presence of 100,000 people, men, women, and children with whom I have no contact upon the subject, take an oath that I will enforce upon them the law of Moses, of Lysander, Solon, of Justinian, and of Alfred, that oath is, on general principles of law and reason, of no obligation. It is of no obligation, not merely because it is intrinsically a criminal one, but also because it is given to nobody and consequently pledges my faith to nobody. It is merely given to the winds. It would not alter the case at all to say that among these 100,000 persons in whose presence the oath was taken, there were 2, 3, or 5,000 male adults who had secretly, by secret ballot, in a way to avoid making themselves individually known to me or to the remainder of the 100,000, designated me as their agent to rule, control, plunder, or if need be, murder these 100,000 people. The fact that they have designated me secretly and in a manner to prevent my knowing them individually prevents all privity between them and me, and consequently makes it possible that there can be any contract or pledge or faith on my part towards them. Makes it impossible that there can be any contract or pledge or faith on my part towards them. For it is impossible that I can pledge my faith in any legal sense to a man whom I neither know nor have any means of knowing individually. So as far as I am concerned, then, these 2, 3, or 5,000 persons are a secret band of robbers and murderers who have secretly and in a way to save themselves from all responsibility for my acts designated me as their agent and have, through some other agent or pretended agent, made their wishes to me known. Being nevertheless individually unknown to me and having no open authentic contract with me, my oath is, on general principles of law and reason, of no validity as a pledge of faith to them. And being no pledge of faith to them, it is no pledge of faith to anybody. It is mere idle wind. At most, it is only a pledge of faith to an unknown band of robbers and murderers, whose instrument for plundering and murdering other people I thus publicly confess myself to be, and it has no other obligation than a similar oath given to any other unknown body of pirates, robbers, and murderers. For the reasons, the oaths taken by the members of Congress to support the Constitution are, on general principles of law and reason, of no validity. They are not only criminal in themselves and therefore void, but they are also void for the reason that they are given to nobody. It cannot be said that in any legitimate or legal sense they are given to the people of the United States, because neither the whole nor any large proportion of the whole people of the United States ever, either openly or secretly, appointed or designated these people as their agents to carry the Constitution into effect. The great body of the people, that is, men, women, and children, were never asked or ever permitted to signify, if in any formal matter, either openly or secretly, their choice or wish on the subject. The most of that these members of Congress can say in favor of their appointment is simply this: each one can say for himself, I have evidence satisfactorily to myself that there exists scattered throughout the country a band of men having a tacit understanding with each other and calling themselves the people of the United States, whose general purpose are to control and plunder each other and all other persons in the country, and so far as they can, even in neighboring countries, and to kill every man who shall attempt to defend his person and property against their schemes of plunder and dominion. Who these men are individually, I have no certain means of knowing, for they sign no papers and give no open authentic evidence of their individual membership. They are not known individually even to each other. They are apparently as much afraid of being individually known to each other as of being known to other persons. Hence, they ordinarily have no mode either of exercising or making known their individual membership, otherwise than by giving their votes secretly for certain agents to do their will. But although these men are individually unknown, both to each other and to other persons, it is generally understood in the country that none but male persons of the age of 21 years and upwards can be members. It is also generally understood that all male persons born in the country, having certain complexions and in some localities certain amounts of property, and in certain cases even persons of foreign birth, are permitted to be members. But it appears that usually not more than 1/2, 2/3, or in some cases 3/4 of all who are thus permitted to become members of the band or ever exercise or consequently prove their actual membership in the only mode in which they ordinarily can exercise or prove it, viz., by giving their votes secretly for the officers or agents of the band. The number of these secret votes, so far as we have any account of them, varies greatly from year to year, thus tending to prove that the band, instead of being a permanent organization, is merely a pro tempore affair with those who choose to act with it for the time being. The gross number of the secret votes, of what purports to be their gross number, is different in different localities, is occasionally published. Whether these reports are accurate or not, we have no means of knowing. It is generally supposed that great frauds are often committed in depositing them. They are understood to be received and counted by certain men who are themselves appointed for that purpose by the same secret process by which all the other officers and agents of the band are selected. According to the reports of these receivers of votes, for whose accuracy or honesty, however, I cannot vouch, and according to my best knowledge of the whole number of males in my district who, it is supposed, were permitted to vote, it would appear that 1/2, 2/3, or 3/4 actually did vote. Who the men were, individually, who cast these votes, I have no knowledge, for the whole thing was done secretly. But of the secret votes thus given for what they call a member of Congress, the receivers reportedly that I had a majority, or at least a large number than any other one person, and it is only by virtue of such a designation that I am now here to act in concert with others similarly selected in other parts of the country. It is understood among those who sent me here that all persons who selected so selected will, on coming together at the city of Washington, take an oath in each other's presence to support the Constitution of the United States. By this is meant a certain paper that was drawn up 80 years ago. It was never signed by anybody, apparently has no obligation and never had an obligation as any contract. In fact, few persons ever read it, and doubtless much of the largest of the numbers who voted for me or of the others never even saw it, and now pretend to know what it means. Nevertheless, it is often spoken of in the country as the Constitution of the United States, and for some reason or other, the men who sent me here seem to expect that I and all with whom I act will swear to carry this Constitution into effect. I am therefore ready to take this oath and to cooperate with all others similarly selected who are ready to take the same oath. This is the most that any member of Congress can say in proof that he has any constituency, that he represents anybody, that his oath to support the Constitution is given to anybody, or he pledges his faith to anybody. He has no open, written, or other authentic evidence, such as is required in all other cases, that he was ever appointed the agent or representative of a body, of anybody. He has no written power of attorney from any single individual. He has no such legal knowledge as is required in all other cases by which he can identify a single one of those who pretended to have appointed him to represent them. Of course, his oath, professedly given to them to support the Constitution, is, on general principles of law and reason, an oath given to nobody. It pledges his faith to nobody. If he fails to fulfill his oath, not a single person can come forward and to say to him, "You have betrayed me," or broken faith with me. No one can come forward and say to him, "I appointed you my attorney to act for me. I required you to swear that as my attorney you would support the Constitution. You promised me that you would do so, and now you have forfeited the oath you gave to me." No single individual can say this. No open, avowed, or responsible association or body of men can come forward to say to him, "We appointed you our attorney to act for us. We required you to swear that, as our attorney, you would support the Constitution. You promised us that you would do so. Now you have forfeited the oath you gave us." No open, avowed, or responsible association or body of men can say this to him, because there is no such association or body of men in existence. If any one should assert that there is such an association, let him prove, if he can, who compose it. Let him produce, if he can, any open, written, or other authentic contract signed or agreed to by these men, forming themselves into an association, making themselves known as such to the world, appointing him as their agent, and making themselves individually or as an association responsible for his acts done by their authority. Until all this can be shown, no one can say that in any legitimate sense there is any such association, and that he is their agent, and that he ever gave his oath to them, or ever pledged his faith to them. On general principles of law and reason, it would be sufficient answer for him to say to all individuals and to all pretended associations or individuals who should accuse him of a breach of faith to them, "I never knew you. Where is your evidence that you either individually or collectively ever appointed me your attorney? That you ever require me to swear to you that as your attorney I would support the Constitution? Or that I have now broken any faith that I have ever pledged to you? You may or you may not be members of that secret band of robbers and murderers who act in secret, appoint their agents by a secret ballot, who keep themselves individually unknown even though the agents they thus appoint, and who therefore cannot claim that they have any agents, or that any of their pretended agents ever gave his oath or pledged his faith to them. I repudiate you altogether. My oath was given to others with whom you have nothing to do, or it was idle wind, given only to the idle wind. Begone! For the same reasons, the oaths of all the other pretended agents of this secret band of robbers and murderers are, on general principles of law and reason, equally destitute of obligation. They are given to nobody, but only to the winds. The oaths of the tax gatherers and treasurers of the band are, on general principles of law and reason, of no validity. In any tax gathering, for example, should for example, should put the money he receives into his pocket and refuse to part with it, the members of his band could not say to him, "You collected the money as our agent for our uses, and you swore to pay it over to us, or to those who we should appoint to receive it. You have betrayed us and broken faith with us." It would be a sufficient answer for him to say to them, "I never knew you. You never made yourself individually known to me. I never came by oath to you and as individuals. You may or may not be members of the secret band who appoint agents to rob and murder other people, but who are cautious to not make themselves individually known either to such agents or to those whom their agents are commissioned to rob. If you are members of that band, you have given me no proof that you are ever commissioned me to rob others for your benefit. I never knew you as individuals, or of course never promised you that I would pay over to you the proceeds of my robberies. I committed my robberies on my own account and for my own profit. If you thought I was a fool enough to allow you to keep yourselves concealed and use me as your tool for robbing other persons, or that I would take all the personal risk of the robberies and pay over the proceeds to you, you were particularly simple. As I took all the risk of my robberies, I proposed to take all the profits. Begone, you are fools, as well as villains. If I gave my oath to anybody, I gave it to other persons than you. But I really gave it to nobody. I only gave it to the winds. It answered my purpose at the time. It enabled me to get the money I was after, and now I propose to keep it. If you expected me to pay it over to you, you relied only upon that honor that is said to prevail among thieves. You now understand that that is very poor reliance. I trust you may become wise enough to never rely upon it again. If I have any duty in the matter, it is to give back the money to those from whom I took it, not to pay it over to the villains such as you. On general principles of law and reason, the oaths which foreigners take on coming here and being naturalized, as it is called, are of no validity. They are necessarily given to nobody because there is no open, authentic association to which they can join themselves, or to whom, as an individual, they can pledge their faith. No such association or organization as the people of the United States having ever been formed by an open, written, authentic, or voluntary contract. There is, on general principles of law and reason, no such association or organization in existence. And all oaths that purport to be given to such an association are necessarily given only to the winds. They cannot be said to be given to any man or body of men as individuals, because no man or body of men can come forward with any proof that the oaths were given to them or as individuals or to any association of which they are members. To say that there is a tacit understanding among a portion of the male adults of the country that they call themselves the people of the United States, and that they will act in concert in subjecting the remainder of the people of the United States to their dominion, but that they will keep themselves personally concealed by doing all their acts secretly, is wholly insufficient on general principles of law and reason to prove the existence of any such association or organization as the people of the United States, or consequently to prove that the oaths of foreigners were given to any such association. On general principles of law and reason, all the oaths which since the war have been given by Southern men that they will obey the laws of Congress, support the Union, and the like, are of no validity. Such oaths are invalid, not only because they are extorted by military power and threats of confiscation, and because they are in contravention to men's natural right to do as they please about supporting the government, but also because they were given to nobody. They were nominally given to the United States, but being nominally given to the United States, they were necessarily given to nobody. Because on general principles of law and reason, there were no United States to whom the oaths could be given. That is to say, there were no open, authentic, avowed, legitimate association, corporation, or body of men known as the United States, or as the people of the United States, to whom the oaths could have been given. If anyone says there was such a corporation, let him state who were the individuals that composed it and how and when they became a corporation. Were Mr. A and Mr. B and Mr. C members of it? If so, where are their signatures? Where's the evidence of their membership? Where the record? Where the open, authentic proof? There is none. Therefore, in law and reason, there is no such corporation. On general principles of law and reason, every corporation, association, or organized body of men having a legitimate corporate existence and the legitimate corporate rights must consist of certain known individuals who can prove by legitimate and reasonable evidence their membership. But nothing of this kind can be proved in regards to the corporation or body of men who call themselves the United States. Not a man of them in all the northern states can prove by any legitimate evidence, such as is required to prove membership in any other legal corporation, that he himself or any other man whom he can name is a member of any corporation or association called the United States or the people of the United States, or, consequently, that there is such any corporation. And since no such corporation can be proved to exist, it cannot, of course, be proved that the oaths of Southern men were given to any such corporation. The most that can be claimed is that the oaths were given to a secret band of robbers and murderers who called themselves the United States and extorted those oaths. But this is certainly not enough to prove that the oaths were of any obligation. On general principles of law and reason, the oaths are of soldiers that they will serve a given number of years, that they will obey the orders of their superior officers, that they will bear true allegiance to the government, and so forth, are of no obligation, independently of the criminality of an oath, that for a given number of years he will kill all whom he may be commanded to kill, without exercising his own judgment or conscience as to the justice or necessity of such a killing. There is this further reason why a soldier's oath is of no obligation, viz. That, like all the other oaths that have now been mentioned, it is given to nobody. There being in no legitimate sense any such corporation or nation as the United States, nor consequently any legitimate sense any such government as the government of the United States, a soldier's oath given to or contract made with such a nation or government is necessarily an oath given to or contract made with nobody. Consequently, such an oath or contract can be of no obligation. On general principles of law and reason, the treaties, so-called, which purport to be entered into with other nations by persons calling themselves ambassadors, secretaries, presidents, and senators of the United States in the name and in behalf of the people of the United States, are of no validity. These so-called ambassadors, secretaries, presidents, and senators who claim to be the agents of the people of the United States for making these treaties can show no open, written, or authentic evidence that either the whole people of the United States or any other open, avowed, responsible body of men calling themselves by that name ever authorized these pretended ambassadors and others to make treaties in their name of or binding upon any one of the people of the United States or any other open, avowed, responsible body of men calling themselves by that name, even authorized these pretended ambassadors, their secretaries, and others in their name and behalf to recognize certain other persons calling themselves emperors, kings, queens, and the like as the rightful rulers, sovereigns, masters, or representatives of the different peoples whom they assume to govern, to represent, and to bind. The nations, as they are called, with whom our pretended ambassadors, secretaries, presidents, and secretaries profess to make treaties, are as much myths as our own. On general principles of law and reason, there are no such nations. That is to say, neither the whole people of England, for example, nor any open, avowed, responsible body of men calling themselves by that name ever, by any open, written, or other authentic contract with each other, form themselves into a bona fide, legitimate association or organization, or authorized any king, queen, or other representative to make the treaties in their name, or to bind them, either individually or as an association, by such treaties. Our pretended treaties, then, being made with no legitimate or bona fide nations, are representatives of nations and being made or on our part by persons who have no legitimate authority to act for us, have intrinsically no more validity than a pretended treaty made up by the man in the moon and the king of the Pleiades. On general principles of law and reason, debts contracted in the name of the United States or the people of the United States are of no validity. It is utterly absurd to pretend that debts to the amount of 2,500 millions of dollars are binding upon 35 or 40 million people where there is no particular particle of legitimate evidence, such as would be required to prove a private debt, that could be produced against any one of them that either he or his properly authorized attorney ever contracted to pay 1 cent. Certainly, neither the whole people of the United States nor any number of them are separately or individually contracted to pay a cent of these debts. Certainly, also, neither the whole people of the United States nor any number of them ever, by any open, written, or other authentic or voluntary contract, united themselves as a firm, corporation, or association by the name of the United States or the people of the United States and authorized their agents to contract debts in their name. Certainly, too, there is in existence no such firm, corporation, or association as the United States or the people of the United States, formed by any open, written, or other authentic and voluntary contract and having corporate property with which to pay these debts. How, then, is it possible, on any general principle of law and reason, that debts that are binding upon nobody individually can be binding upon 40 millions of people collectively, when, on general legitimate principles of law and reason, these 40 millions of people neither have nor ever had any corporate property, never made any corporate or individual contract, and neither have nor ever had any corporate existence? Who, then, created the debts in the name of the United States? Why, at most, only a few persons calling themselves members of Congress, etc., who pretended to represent the people of the United States, who really represented only a secret band of robbers and murderers who wanted money to carry on their robberies and murders in which they were then engaged, and who intended to extort from the future people of the United States by robbery and threats of murder, and real murder, if that should be proved necessary, the means to pay these debts. This band of robbers and murderers, who were the real principals in contracting these debts, is a secret one because its members have never entered into an open, written, avowed, and authentic contract by which they may be individually known to the world or even to each other. Their real or pretended representatives who contracted these debts in their name were selected, if selected at all, for that purpose secretly, by secret ballot, and in a way to furnish evidence against none of the principals individually, and these principals were really known individually neither to the pretended representatives who contracted these debts on their behalf, nor to those who lent the money. The money, therefore, was all borrowed and lent in the dark, that is, by men who did not see each other's faces or know each other's names, who could not then and cannot now identify each other as principals in the transaction, and who consequently can prove no contract with each other. Furthermore, the money was all lent and borrowed for criminal purposes, that is, for the purpose of murder and robbery and murder, and for this reason the contracts were intrinsically void. Would have been so even though the real parties, borrowers and lenders, had come face to face and made their contracts openly, in their own proper names. Furthermore, the secret band of robbers and murderers, who were the real borrowers of this money, having no legitimate corporate existence, have no corporate property with which to pay the debts. They do indeed pretend to own large tracts of wild lands lying between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and between the Gulf of Mexico and the North Pole. But on general principles of law and reason, they might as well pretend to own the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans themselves, or the atmosphere and the sunlight, and to hold themselves and dispose of them for the payment of these debts. Having no corporate property with which to pay what purports to be their corporate debts, this secret band of robbers and murderers are really bankrupt. They have nothing to pay with, In fact, they do not propose to pay their debts otherwise than from the proceeds of their future robberies and murders. These are confessed their sole reliance and were known to be such by the lenders of the money at the time the money was lent, and it was therefore virtually a part of the contract that the money should be repaid only from the proceeds of future robberies and murders. For this reason, if for no other contract, the contracts were void from the beginning. In fact, those apparently two classes, borrowers and lenders, were really one of the same class. They borrowed and lent money from one to the other. They themselves were the only part and parcel, but the very life and soul of this secret band of robbers and murderers who borrowed and spent the money. Individually, they furnished money for a common enterprise, taking in return what purported to be corporate promises for individual loans. The only excuse they have for taking these so-called corporate promises for individual loans by the same parties was that they might have some apparent excuse for the future robberies of the band, that is, to pay the debts of the corporation, and that they might also know what shares they were to be respectively entitled to of these proceeds in their future robberies. Finally, if these debts had been created for the most innocent and honest purposes and in the most open and honest manner by the real parties to the contract, these parties could thereby have bound nobody but themselves and no property but their own. They could have bound nobody that should have come after them and no property subsequently created by or belonging to other persons. The Constitution, having never been signed by anybody, and there being no other open, written, or authentic contract between any parties whatever, by virtue of what the United States government, so-called, is maintained, and it being well known that none but male persons of 21 years of age and upwards are allowed any voice in the government, and it being also well known that a large number of these adult persons seldom or never vote at all, and that all those who do vote do so secretly by secret ballot and in any way to prevent their individual votes from being known, either to the world or to even each other, and consequently in a way to make no one openly responsible for the acts of their agents or representatives. All these being known, the questions arise. Who compose the real governing power in the country? Who are the men, the responsible men who rob us of our property, restrain us of our own liberty, subject us to their arbitrary dominion, and devastate our homes and shoot us down by the hundreds of thousands if we resist? How shall we find these men? How shall we know them from others? How shall we defend ourselves and our property against them? Who of our neighbors are members of this secret band of robbers and murderers? How can we know which of these houses that we may burn or demolish them? Which their property that we may destroy it? Which their persons that we may kill them and rid the world of ourselves of such tyrants and monsters? These are the questions that must be answered before men can be free, before they can protect themselves against the secret band of robbers and murderers who now plunder, enslave, and destroy them. The answer to these questions is that only those who have the will and power to shoot down their fellow man are the real rulers in this, as in all other so-called civilized countries, for by no others will civilized men be robbed and enslaved. Among savages, mere physical strength on the part of one man may enable him to rob, enslave, or kill another man. Among barbarians, mere physical strength on the part of the body of men disciplined and acting in concert, though with very little money or other wealth, may, under some circumstances, enable them to rob, enslave, and kill another body of men as numerous or perhaps even more numerous than themselves. And among both savages and barbarians, mere want may sometimes compel one man to sell himself to as a slave to another. But with so-called civilized people, among whom knowledge, wealth, and the means of acting in concert have become diffused, and whose who have invented such weapons and other means of defense as to render merely physical strength of less importance, and by whom soldiers in any requisite number and other instrumentalities of war in any requisite amount can always be had for money. The question of war, and consequently the question of power, is little else than a mere question of money. As a necessary consequence, those who stand ready to furnish this money are the real rulers. It is so in Europe, and it is so in this country. In Europe, the nominal rulers, the emperors, the kings, and parliaments are anything but the real rulers of their respective countries. They are little or nothing else than mere tools employed by the wealthy to rob, enslave, and if need be, murder those who have less wealth or none at all. The Rothschilds and that class of money lenders of whom they are representatives and agents, men who never think of lending a shilling to their next door neighbors for purposes of honest industry unless upon the most ample security and at the highest rate of interest, stand ready at all times to lend money in unlimited amounts to those robbers and murderers who call themselves governments, to be expended in shooting down those who do not submit quietly to being robbed and enslaved. They lend their money in this manner, knowing that it is to be expended in murdering their fellow men for simply seeking their liberty and their rights, knowing also that neither the interest nor the principal will ever be paid, except as it will be extorted under terror of the repetition of such murders as they for which the money lent is to be expended. These money lenders, the Rothschilds, for example, say to themselves, if we lend 100 million sterling to the Queen and Parliament in England, it will enable them to murder 20, 50, or even 100,000 people in England, Ireland, and India, and the terror inspired by such wholesale slaughter will enable them to keep the whole people of those countries in subjection for 20 or perhaps 50 years to come, to control all the trade and industry, and to extort from them large amounts of money under the name of taxes. And from the wealth thus extorted from them, they, the Queen and Parliament, can afford to pay us a higher rate of interest for our money that we can get in any other way. Or if we lend this sum to the Emperor of Austria, it will enable him to murder so many of his people as to strike terror into the rest, and thus enable him to keep them in subjection and extort money from them for 20 or 50 years to come. And they say the same in regard of to the Emperor of Russia, the King of Prussia, the Emperor of France, or any other ruler so-called, who, in their judgment, will be able, by murdering a reasonable portion of his people, to keep the rest in subjugation and extort money from them for a long time to come, to pay the interest and principal of the money lent him. And why are these men so ready to lend money for murdering their fellow men? Solely for this reason, viz., that such loans are considered better investments than loans for purposes of honest industry. They pay higher rates of interest, and it is less trouble to look after them. This is the whole matter. The question of making these loans is, with these lenders, a mere question of pecuniary profit. They lend money to be expended in robbing, enslaving, and murdering their fellow men solely because, on the whole, such loans pay better than others. They are no respecter of persons, no superstitious fools that reverence monarchs. They care no more for a king or an emperor than they do for a beggar, except as he is a better customer and that can pay them better instead of interest for their money. If they doubt his ability to make his murderers successful for maintaining his power and thus extorting money from his people in the future, they dismiss him unceremoniously, as they would dismiss any other hopeless bankrupt who should want to borrow money to save himself from open insolvency. When these great lenders of blood money, like the Rothschilds, have loaned vast sums in this way for purposes of murder to an emperor or a king, they sell out the bonds taken by them in small amounts to anybody and everybody who are disposed to buy them at satisfactory prices to hold as investments. The Rothschilds, they thus soon get back their money with great profits and are now ready to lend money in the same way again to any other robber and murderer. called an emperor or king who they think is likely to be successful in his robbery and murders and able to pay a good price for the money necessary to carry them on. This business of lending blood money is one of the most thoroughly sordid, cold-blooded, and criminal that was ever carried on to any considerable extent amongst human beings. It is like lending money to slave traders or to the common robbers and pirates to be repaid out of their plunder, and the men who loan money to governments so-called for the purpose of enabling the latter to rob, enslave, and murder their people are among the greatest villains that the world has ever seen, and they have as much deserved to be hunted and killed, if they cannot otherwise be got rid of, as any slave trader, robbers, or pirates that ever lived. When these emperors and kings, so-called, have obtained their loans, they proceed to hire and train immense numbers of professional murderers called soldiers and employ them in shooting down all who resist their demands for money. In fact, most of them keep large bodies of these murderers constantly in their service as their only means of enforcing their extortions. There are now, I think, 4 or 5 million of these professional murderers constantly employed by the so-called sovereigns of Europe. The enslaved people are, of course, forced to support and pay all these murderers, as well to submit to all the other extortions which murderers are employed to enforce. It is only in this way that most of the so-called governments of Europe are maintained. These so-called governments are in reality only great bands of robbers and murderers, organized, disciplined, and constantly on the alert. And the so-called sovereigns in these different governments are simply the heads or chiefs of different bands of robbers and murderers. And these heads or chiefs are dependent upon the lenders of blood money for the means to carry on their robberies and murderers. They could not sustain themselves a moment but for the loans made to them by these blood money loan mongers, and their first care is to maintain their credit with them, for they know their end is come the instant their credit with them fails. Consequently, the first proceeds of their extortions are scrupulously applied to the payments of the interest of their loans. In addition to paying the interest of their bonds, they perhaps grant to the holder of them great monopolies in banking, like the banks of England, of France, and of Vienna, with the agreement that these banks shall furnish money whenever, in sudden emergencies, it may be necessary to shoot down more of their people. Perhaps also by means of tariffs on competing imports. They give great monopolies to certain branches of industry in which these lenders of blood money are engaged. They also, by unequal taxation, exempt wholly or partially the property of these loan mongers and throw corresponding burdens upon those who are too poor and weak to resist. Thus it is evident that all these men who call themselves the high-sounding names of emperors, kings, sovereigns, monarchs, the most Christian majesties, the most Catholic majesties, high mightinesses, most serene and potent prince, and the like, and whom claim to rule by the grace of God, by divine right, that is, by special authority from heaven, are intrinsically not only the merest miscreant and wretches engaged solely in plundering, enslaving, and murdering their fellow men, but that they are also the merest hangers-on, the servile, obsequious, fawning dependents of tools of these blood money loan mongers on which they rely for their means to carry on their crimes. These loan mongers, like the Rothschilds, laugh in their sleeves and say to themselves, these despicable creatures who call themselves emperors, kings, and majesties, the most serene, potent prince, who profess to wear crowns and sit on thrones, who deck themselves with ribbons and feathers and jewels, and surround themselves with hired flatterers and lip-spittles, and whom we suffer to strut around and palm themselves off upon fools and slaves as sovereigns and lawgivers specially appointed by Almighty God, and to hold themselves out as they sole fountains of honor and dignities and wealth and power. All these miscreants and impostors know that we make them and use them, that in us they live, move, and have their being, that we require them as the price of their positions to make upon themselves all the labor, all the danger, and all the odium, of all the crimes they commit for our profit, and that we will unmake them, strip them of their gewgaws and send them out in the world as beggars and give them over to the vengeance of the people that they have enslaved the moment they refuse to commit any crime we require of them or to pay over to us such share of the proceeds of their robberies as we see fit to demand. Now, what is true in Europe is substantially true in this country. The difference is the immaterial one, that in this country there is no visible permanent head or chief of these robbers and murderers who call themselves the government. That is to say, there is no one man who calls himself the state or even emperor, king, or sovereign. No one who claims to be he and his children rule by the grace of God or by divine right or by special appointment from heaven. There are only certain men who call themselves presidents, senators, representatives, and claim to be the authorized agent for the time being and for certain short periods of all the people of the United States, but who can show no credentials or powers of attorney or any other open authentic evidence that they are so, and who notoriously are not so, but are really only the agents of a secret band of robbers and murderers whom they themselves do not know and have no means of knowing individually, but who they trust will openly and secretly, when the crisis comes, sustain them in all their usurpacious crimes. What is important to be noticed is that these so-called presidents, senators, and representatives, these pretended agents of all the people of the United States, the moment their exactions meet with any formidable resistance from any portion of the people themselves, are obliged, like their co-robbers and murderers in Europe, to fly at once to the lenders of blood money for the means to sustain their power, and they borrow their money on the same principle and for the same purpose, viz., to be expended in shooting down all those people of the United States, their own constituents and principals, as they profess to call them, who resist the robberies and enslavements which these borrowers of the money are practicing upon them. And they expect to repay the loans, if at all, only from the proceeds of the future robberies, which they anticipate it will be easy for them and their successors to perpetrate through a long series of years upon their pretended principles, if they can but shoot down now some hundreds of thousands of them, and thus strike terror in the rest. Perhaps the facts were never made more evident in any country on the globe than in our own, that these soulless blood money loanmongers are the real rulers, that they rule from the most sordid and mercenary motives, that the ostensible government, the president, senators, and representatives so-called, are merely their tools, and that no ideas of or regard for justice or liberty had anything to do in inducing them to lend their money for the war. In proof of all this, look at the following facts. Nearly 100 years ago, we professed to have got rid of all the religious superstitions inculcated by a servile and corrupt priesthood in Europe, that rulers, so-called, derived their authority directly from heaven, and that it was consequently a religious duty on the part of the people to obey them. We professed long ago to have learned that the governments could rightfully exist only by the free will and on voluntary support of those who might choose to sustain them. We all professed to have known long ago that the only legitimate objects of government were maintenance of liberty and justice equally for all. All this we had professed for nearly 100 years, and we professed to look at the pity and contempt upon those ignorant, superstitious, and enslaved peoples of Europe who were so easily kept in subjugation by the frauds and force of priests and kings. Notwithstanding all this that we had learned and known and professed for nearly a century, these lenders of blood money had, for a long series of years previously to the war, been the willing accomplice to the slaveholders in perverting the government from the purposes of liberty and justice to do their greatest crimes. They had been such accomplices for a purely pecuniary consideration, to wit, a control of the markets in the South. In other words, the privilege of holding the slaveholders themselves in industrial and commercial subjection to the manufacturers and merchants of the North, who afterwards furnished the money for the war. And these northern merchants and manufacturers, these lenders of blood money, were willing to continue to be the accomplice of the slaveholders in the future for the same pecuniary considerations. But the slaveholders, either doubting the fidelity of their northern allies or feeling themselves strong enough to keep their slaves in subjection without northern assistance, would no longer pay the price which these northern men demanded, and it was to enforce this price in the future, that is, to monopolize the southern markets, to maintain their industrial and commercial control over the South, that these northern manufacturers and merchants lent some of the profits of their former monopolies for the war in order to secure to themselves the same or greater monopolies in the future. These, and not any love of liberty or justice, were the motives of which the money for the war was lent by the North. In short, the North said to the slaveholders, if you will not pay us our price, give us control of your markets. For our assistance against your slaves, we will secure the same price. Keep control of your markets by helping your slaves against you and using them as our tools for maintaining dominion over you. For the control of your markets we will have, whether the tools we use for the purpose be black or white, and be the cost in blood of money, what it may. On this principle, and from this motive, and not from any love of liberty and justice, the money was lent in enormous amounts and at enormous rates of interest, and it was only by these means that these loans that the objects of the war were accomplished. And now these lenders of blood money demand their pay, and the government, so-called, becomes their tool, their servile, slavish, villainous tool, to extort from the labor of the enslaved people, both of the North and the South. It is to be extorted from every form of direct and indirect and unequal taxation. Not only the nominal debt and interest, enormous as the latter was, are to be paid in full, that these holders of the debt are to be paid still further, and perhaps doubly, triply, or quadruply paid by such tariffs on imports as will enable our home manufacturers to realize enormous prices for their commodities. Also by such monopolies in banking as will enable them to keep control of and thus enslave and plunder the industry and trade of the great body of the northern people themselves. In short, the industrial and commercial slavery of the great body of the people, North and South, black and white, is the price which these lenders of blood money demand and insist upon and are determined to secure, and in return for the money lent for the war. This program has been fully arranged and systematized, that they put their sword into the hands of the chief murderer of the war and charge him to carry their scheme into effect. And now he, speaking as their organ, says, "Let us have peace." The meaning of this is, submit quietly to all the robbery and slavery we have arranged for you, and you will have peace. But in case you resist, the same lenders of blood money who furnish the means to subdue the South will furnish the means again to subdue you. These are the terms on which alone the government, or with few exceptions, any other, ever gives peace to its people. The whole affair on the part of these who furnish the money has been, and now is, a deliberate scheme of robbery and murder, not merely to monopolize the markets of the South, but also to monopolize the currency and those control of the industries and trade, and thus plunder and enslave the laborers of both the North and South. And Congress and the President are today the merest tools for these purposes. They are obligated to be, for they know that their own power, as rulers so-called, is at an end. The moment their credit with the blood money loan mongers fails, they are like a bankrupt in the hands of an extortioner. They dare not say nay to any demand made upon them, and to hide at once, if possible, both their servility and crimes. They attempt to divert public attention by crying out that they have abolished slavery, that they have saved the country, that they have preserved our glorious Union, and that in now paying the national debt, as they call it, as if the people themselves, all of them who are to be taxed for its payment, had really voluntarily joined in contracting it. They are simply maintaining the national honor. by maintaining the national honor, they simply mean simply that they themselves, open robbers and murderers, assume to be the nation and will keep faith with those who lent them the money necessary to enable them to crush the great body of the people under their feet, and will faithfully appropriate from the proceeds of their future robberies and murders enough to pay all their loans and principal and interest. The pretense that the abolition of slavery was either a motive or justification for war is a fraud of the same character with that of maintaining the national honor. Who but such robbers, usurpers, and murderers as they are ever established slavery? Who but such usurpers, robbers, and murderers as they ever established slavery? Or what government, except one resting upon the sword, like the one we have now, was ever capable of maintaining such slavery? And why did these men abolish slavery? Not from any love of liberty in general, not as any act of justice to the black man himself, but only as a war measure. And because they wanted his assistance and that of his friends, and in carrying on the war they had undertaken for maintaining and intensifying that political, commercial, and industrial slavery to which they have subjected the great body of the people, both black and white. And yet these impostors now cry out that they have abolished the chattel slavery of the black man, although that was not the motive of the war, as if they thought they could thereby conceal, atone for, or justify that other slavery which they were fighting to perpetuate and to render more rigorous and inexorable than ever it was before. There was no difference of the principle, but only a degree between the slavery they boast they have abolished and the slavery they were fighting to preserve. For all restraints upon men's natural liberty not necessary for the simple maintenance of justice are of the nature of slavery, and differ from each other only in degree. If their object had really been to abolish slavery or maintain liberty and justice generally, they had only to say, all, whether white or black, who want the protection of this government shall have it, and all who do not want it will be left in peace so long as they leave us in peace. Had they said this, slavery would necessarily have been abolished at once. The war would have been saved, and 1,000 times nobler union than we have ever had would have been the result. It would have been a voluntary union of free men, such a union as will one day exist among all men the world over, if the several nations, so-called, shall ever get rid of the usurpers, robbers, and murderers called governments, and that now plunder, enslave, and destroy them. Still another of the frauds of these men is that they are now establishing, and that the war was designed to establish, a government of consent. The only idea that ever manifested as to what is a government of consent is this, that it is one to which everybody must consent or be shot. This idea was the dominant one on which the war was carried on, and it is the dominant one now which we have got what is called peace. Their pretense that they have saved the country and preserved our glorious union are frauds like all the rest of their pretense. By them they mean simply that they have subjugated and maintained their power over an unwilling people. This they call saving the country, as if an enslaved and subjugated people, or as if any kept in subjugation by the sword, as it is intended that all of us shall be hereafter, could be said to have any country. This, too, they call preserving our glorious union, as if there could be said to be any union, glorious or inglorious, that was not voluntary, or as there could be said to be any union between masters and slave, between those who conquer and those who are subjugated. All these cries of having abolished slavery, or having saved the country, or having preserved the union, or of establishing a government of consent, and of maintaining the national honor, are all gross shameless, transparent cheats. So transparent that they ought to deceive no one when uttered as justification for war, or for the government that has succeeded the war, or for now compelling the people to pay the cost of the war, or for compelling anybody to support a government that he does not want. The lesson taught by all these facts is this: as long as mankind continued to pay national debts, so-called, that is, so long as they are such dupes and cowards as to pay for being cheated, plundered, enslaved, and murdered, so long there will be to lend the money for those purposes, and will that money, a plenty of tools called soldiers, can be hired to keep them in subjugation. But when they refuse any longer to pay for being thus cheated, plundered, enslaved, murdered, they will cease to have cheats and usurpers and robbers and murderers and blood money loan mongers for masters. That was the conclusion of No Treason, Constitution of No Authority by Lysander-Spooner. There is an appendix. We can read that. I wanted to jump over to something that's along these lines. The war of then is the war of today. The purpose, we're into it. I tell you, I try to find words that calls attention for people, just to call the attention. When I identified the national debt, so-called, as a gobzillion, beyond, folks, unimaginable numbers, or imagination numbers, a gobzillion. I can now read through Lysander-Spooner's writings here the same condition, can't we? We're talking about the same exact condition as I told you was coming on to us years ago when I saw the unqualified one going to hit the presidency. And I predicted he would be the president for these reasons. This is a consistent statement that happened back in the Civil War times, what's happening today. I hope you heard all that. Now, I don't know what I can do, what I can say. There's only so much I can talk about this stuff. I can try and bring these principles to you. In trying to get to now we have this knowledge that there's another idea in the world. It's before us, and it's not new to us. We're not seeing anything new. But that there was life was going on as well. These things too shall pass, folks. And this is what I guess where I'm an optimist somewhat. In light of all this despicable nature that the governments are these cheats and usurpers, robbers and murderers, that our downfall is allowing blood money through loan mongers, that if we would just focus on solving that, we would probably catapult ourselves forward for all those people that want to talk about the enlightened state and knowing something and being wise. That we still have to go from here to there. These things too shall pass, but they will pass, and their direction will be determined by us. And each one of us that does not allow the presumed consent to continue. Well, I tell you to withdraw. Start, don't buy, don't comply, ask why. Just step back. It's a simple way to say exactly what you just heard me read for an hour. But there are certain things that I want, some realities that we have to look at today. As we continue to move, as I tell you, try to move for that better day. As we know better, or remember better, as we remember even at all, I hope what we do better. And this is the only thing I can see. We continue to go on. We continue to be played. We're the tools of our own tools to ourselves because we don't throw it off. I tell you, what occupies you, you're required to throw it off. Here we're returning to the more stringent occupation. An open warfare. Now, there's not going to be a cessation. Remember, peace means that you agree with the occupier. That's all it means. And for as little law as we have, there is also, if you look closely, there's a continuing condition that is regarded by the occupier in that international rule, and this is on the bigger thugs, between the bigger thugs, they've agreed, this is what international law is, that you have to honor the laws as an occupier, honor the laws as you found them and change them over time. We notice that there's certain things that can't be changed. And so what they do is they alter those things so far as they can. And what I noticed is that though NDAA allows you to be whisked off into Never Never Land, it doesn't mean you're dead. It just means they want to make a point, folks, or they just want to get you out of contention, or they just want to impress you upon their how murderous they can be, or how close to murderous they can be, and that'll affect you. They take you out of the commission, so to speak. That you have to have still tools. You have to have something to do. And that's why I've been trying to talk a lot about things and tell you what's going on, because there are still tools. In the face of being thrown in the hole, they still were recognizing when I was thrown in the hole, when they wanted to get rid of and they did so, they were successful. They got rid of my documentary exposing child abuse within the child services system to the point of it's slavery. It's sex slavery is what it ends up being. Word got out about this project, even though I was quiet about it. They handled that. They got rid of me, and then when I got back out, that project was all destroyed, and all the evidence of it was pretty well gone. So it was interesting acknowledgement that we've been being watched long before any of this recent revelations by Snowden. And all the credit supposedly to him, but I don't know about that either. That I've been able to watch that there is a limit to even the agents of the corrupt. And I don't know really what that limit is ultimately, but it's there. And because it's there, I wanted to speak to you a little bit about this next thing. And you have to have this in you if you can't put it in writing. I suggest everybody create their own writ in writing. The NDAA, although it takes away your civil and your criminal courts, and it puts you into military control, that does not expressly state that you don't have a right of habeas corpus. For as tenuous as that connection is, this may be one of the only tools you have left if they start to pick you up for whatever reason underneath the guise of even in some kind of an inspection. That what I told you before, they threw me in, I just become a limp rag. It was completely foreign to me. I didn't even know for 2 weeks there was a kite system in order to, if I'd have learned about the kite system in prison, or not prison, but in jail, they would have had a worse time with me. But even them not giving me paper or pencils or anything, paper and pencils showed up, and I made I made paper. You got to understand what you got to do pretty quick. Put everything that's legal, write legal material on. Again, despite the lack of law, the gang members recognized they couldn't touch the things that I wrote the terms legal material on. And so I see there's something still working, even though they're lawless. And you need to know that, and you need to be able to pick up tools, whether they work or not. They also give you something to focus on. I'll just tell you that's important. They become all you can do then is you just become a stick in every spoke you can find. You become resistant. And I want to talk about the habeas corpus. It didn't get actually abolished. It actually, to be constitutional, if this is anything running still in a constitution, this is something the occupier couldn't change as it came in on the land. And it's only a procedural remedy. It's not it's a civil action that's procedural. But it's important to understand. And I told you this a long time ago. You got to find your state the way your state does it, but federal will be overriding. You'll be writing this typically to the unqualified one in office, because ultimately I think, as I conceive this, how this thing works, he's the one that has you under hold. He's the one that's holding you without proper lawful restraint. Apparently, we're not going to have the right to sue the validity of the law until we get picked up. And they've made it because it's national security knowledge. You won't know that before. That you have to be prepared, as I've been telling you, on how this stuff actually works, not what you think happens. Let me read a couple little things here. We got a few minutes left, maybe 10 minutes. I want to read this thing about habeas corpus so you get in your idea, your mind, that they're available. And you don't have to do it, but it's best if you have one, a piece of paper, a writ, asking for you to be produced before a civil authority. It means it would have to be removed from the military authority to look at the lawfulness of your detention, which is already tenuous because they're coming under a national security means, and that detention is lawful. Makes this very difficult. You have to understand this very clearly, what's happening. However, there's still option in there to say that the lawful means they're using was contrived. It's a color of authority felony, what they've done to deprive you of what rights, give them authority they could not otherwise overcome. And that may be your last little bit that you have to try and move you into a civil procedural case that gives you one last gasp, at least gives people one last attempt to help you. If you have more people that know this, when you disappear and after a few hours or so you can't be located, and you are a person of interest because of what you say and what you do to the government, your friends need to step up and they need to track you down. This is very, very difficult. This may be, again, the only little thing we have. They can't actually suspend it. It's been said and laughed at, but that it doesn't exist, but it does. And it exists in funny ways, as I told you. You can write up a paper, and if your friend is wrongly held, and what they do now is they just throw your friend out in the middle of the morning, like 2 a.m. Why? Because they don't want to have to tell you they don't have lawful authority in a court of law where a record's being made that they have arrested you wrongly. Once they throw your friend out, the habeas corpus is null and void. That's the purpose of it. It's a procedural remedy for a failure of due process or the challenge of a law that deprived you of the process. You may have the body is a writ, a court order, that requires a person under arrest to be brought before a judge or into court. The principle of the habeas corpus ensures that the prisoner can be released from unlawful detention, that is, detention lacking sufficient cause or evidence. The remedy can be sought by the prisoner or by any person coming to the prisoner's aid. Now, I have to tell you, in practice, they really don't like to have you come in to aid someone. They'll fight you tooth and nail. You just have to be geared up for that. You got to start learning these processes. This is not a time to be shirking our responsibility to protect ourselves, or try to. As I said, I was brought in. First thing I needed, they weren't, for the first week, I didn't see pencil or paper. Till the inmates started figuring it out, and then they started helping. But I was clueless, never been there before. And when I got my first figured out how to get my paper when a pencil showed up, boy, did the government start having trouble with me. So they've been through that before, and you have to know that's what you're looking at. And you have to know that from the outside, they're going to want to keep your help from knowing where you're at, because that's part of the trick of a habeas. You have to serve the guy who's got the authority to release, to have wrongly ordered you held up. And in my mind, the federal side, you'd probably have to file 2, one to the state governor and one to the federal, because you don't know which government's got you. And they both have authority to hold you. The right originated in an English legal system and is now available in many nations. It has historically been an important legal instrument safeguarding individual freedom against arbitrary state action. It has been extended to non-police authorities, as in the 1898 Queen's Bench case of ex parte Dorothy Hopkins, which has successfully been utilized more recently in India to liberate a woman from Madrasa. A writ of habeas corpus is also known as the Great Writ. It is a summons with the force of a court order, and it is addressed to the custodian, a prison official, for example, and demands that the prisoner to be taken before the court and that the custodian present proof of authority, allowing the court to determine whether the custodian has lawful authority to detain the prisoner. Now, what they've done in NDAA is they've determined you not to be a prisoner, you're an enemy combatant. You'd have to challenge that characterization as a felony, color of authority, felony of extortion of your right to have your status changed only lawfully, not by the unlawful excuse or other felony of a necessity claimed by national security. This would be very complicated but very straightforward discussion about going through the maze that's now been thrown up by the government about what habeas corpus can do and how they've given you other administrative issues, but that you have to understand you're in a court without a court. You're in without a court, without a trial, without evidence, without anything. And this becomes a different charge on a national security imposition. That I'll send you the link in the blogcaster to read some of this for yourself as we're winding down. I'm not going to get to all of this. That you need to really think about this. And I think it's important to start doing it. You want to talk about knowing common law. You have to know your basic prerogative writs. If you think you know about prerogative writs and you think you want to know about all you know about, you're just fooling yourself. And you have to have a lot of people here. This is going to be, you're going to have to know each one of you, but when you have a mass of people, we need to see if the eagle comes to pluck a prairie dog off the mound, we have to know that. And as I told you, the problem is going to be when the government starts figuring out they can just make the false claim and disappear you. And I'm talking about the local people. Now it won't matter what the reason is. Anybody who just doesn't like you, anybody who has more influence in town than you do, who doesn't like you, can get you disappeared. And you're going to need to know this matter to help you out. This is the time of what we're coming into. You heard me read from Lysander-Spooner. These people are murderers. They're pirates. They're usurpers. This government is a fiction. It was made for you, not for them. You have to see through this. What I guess the point is you get enough people understanding that there's supposed to be a remedy here, and then when they don't find it, you go to the next step. You might actually go into the Clive and Bundy issue. You might even go farther than that because everyone finds out that these are just plunderers. The government, it's a system of psychopaths. If the custodian is acting beyond his authority, then the prisoner must be released. Any prisoner or any person acting on his or her behalf may petition the court or a judge for a writ of habeas corpus. One reason for the writ to be sought by a person other than the prisoner is that the detainee might be held incommunicado. Most civil law jurisdictions provide a similar remedy for those unlawfully detained, but this is not always called habeas corpus. For example, in the Spanish-speaking nations, the equivalent remedy for unlawful imprisonment is called amparo de libertad, or protection of freedom. And as I was reading the last paragraph, what came to my mind, you might want to consider, you need to research bill of attainder, and to see if whether or not what they've done with NDAA is an attainder, unlawful under the Constitution as well, notwithstanding that I think you're looking at an establishment that's not even a state that is taking control of everything, that's not underneath the Constitution. You still have to push the fact. In other words, heard Lysander-Spooner, we still have that new Constitution, which we do agree that we could make together. As I was entering in this last discussion, we have the authority and the duty to alter and abolish a government that does not serve us anymore. And Lysander-Spooner, for me, broke the bond that kept me in limiting my thought about what that new government might be, how it might work for us, and then show how the current one is simply an established criminal enterprise. Pretty fascinating the way this all works out against us. But looks like we're going to come to the end. I'll give you the links later. Thank you for tuning in today. Be sure to tune into the hosts on reallibertymedia.com and ucy.tv and join up with WT. I think you might try that as a social network. I've been really holed down with a lot of things going on, so haven't been doing too much of all that, but break in certainly here and there what I can. You can too. Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole can.